All right, we're recording. So,
Right.
hi.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, thanks, Nate. Thanks, everybody. This is Nate Craddock, and I'm Lauren Albandian. I am the owner and coordinator of NORWAC, the Northwest Astrological Conference, and we are coming into our 37th year as a conference, and our second year as a virtual conference with fingers and toes crossed that in 2022 that we in the astrological community can meet face to face once again. We don't know, but we can only hope and pray that we will be afforded that opportunity. So Nate is going to be doing a single lecture at NORWAC. And let me tell you a little bit about Nate, everyone. This is from his bio from NORWAC. So Nate, you have a master's in divinity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what I see? So, which is very cool. So Nate is an astrologer, he's an author, he's a priest, he's an educator, and I love this, all-purpose weirdo who specializes in classical Western astrology. Nate's style works to join the best of astrological techniques to the best practices of spiritual direction. Gotta love that. Bridging the gap between mainstream religiosity and alternative spiritual praxis. He maintains an active international consultation and teaching practice at soulfriendastrology.com and serves a congregation of the United Church of Christ, a progressive mainline Christian denomination. Nate is a master's level student of STA. Could you tell us what STA is?
STA is the School for Traditional Astrology, started by Deb Holding.
Right on. And specializing in horary astrology with Wade Caves, and is also studying Jyotish, which of course is the astrology that comes out of India, Vedic, Jyotish, what we might call Eastern astrology for us Western astrologers. And Nate lives in, I'm not even going to try, well, okay, I'll try, lives in ancestral Potawatomi land, Michigan.
Yeah, Potawatomi land. Yeah.
Potawatomi land, so which is Michigan, and you live there with your husband. How long have you been married?
We've been married since the spring of 2017, so coming up on 4 years of marriage at this point.
Congratulations.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
So this is Nate's first time speaking at NORWAC.
Yes, it is. I'm very excited about it and honored for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And you have been to NORWAC a number of times, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my first time around was in 2019. Then I was also there this past year. They're in spirit virtually, of course. And I just both times I was so delighted by how communal the entire experience felt, and how it felt like just this beautiful place of belonging and togetherness. And I know a lot of folks say that about NORWAC, but it really is a stunning experience of community and togetherness in that way.
Well, my mother started NORWAC in 1984 with that intention. And I have to tell you, I cried a few tears last year and struggled to make the decision. And really, in the long run, there was no other decision to be made. But at the time I was struggling with it, it was really tough because you're talking 35 years of in-person conferences with the intention of creating community. And I was stressed, and the sense of weightiness of making the decision and the sense of responsibility and carrying on my mother's legacy was very strong for me. And I was like, how are we even going to do this? How are we even going to bring this sense of community together in a virtual setting? And I don't know, the divine spirits were with us, and our intentions were strong. And that's in fact what we did. So I'm glad to hear that you experienced it. You felt it. It was real for you and so many other people who came to the conference last year. And we have every intention of creating that kind of environment once again for 2021. So your lecture, which is scheduled for Friday, May 28th, and it's scheduled for 2:30 p.m. at Pacific time. So those of you who want to attend NORWAC and want to make sure to see Nate, that is the time. And of course, you'll find it at norwac.net under the schedule. And that is where you'll get all the information about our schedule and our speakers. And Nate's lecture is called A Primer on Primary Directions. Now, I've been around astrology for a significant portion of my life. My mother started studying astrology when I was 6, and I'm now 62. So it's a long time. I started studying when I was about 23 in real earnest. And I think I've messed around with primaries and tertiaries once or twice and was like, I don't know. Secondaries seem to do fine for me. Why primary directions? What is the deal with primary directions, and why would somebody want to check out and use primary directions?
Yeah, great question, especially considering that it's one of the more difficult techniques to really get a solid handle on because of the complexity of the math involved. Fortunately, we have computers to do it for us today, but you can go back and look at papers from Galileo, who's sitting there calculating primary directions for one of his friend's charts by hand using logarithmic tables in the 17th century. And so the reason that I have found myself drawn to primary directions as a technique is because my first love that really got me into astrology in the first place was the actual sky, the thing that we see out there when we look up. And so the technique of primary directions is rooted in what's called the primary motion of the celestial sphere. So that daily repeating cyclical motion of all the planets and stars around the Earth, apparently around the Earth every 24 hours. And so conceptually, when we're thinking of primary directions, what we're looking at is the interval of time between a person's birth, or say, if you can do directions on a national chart, you can do primary directions on a horary too. It gets really interesting in terms of applications, but we're taking the amount of time between a planet, say, rising, or say for example, a planet's in the 11th house, and we want to know when that planet is actually going to hit the midheaven. When is it going to be right on that meridian? When is that powerful influence of that planet going to be most apparent in the course of that particular day, whether it's of a nativity or a horary or of a nation? And what we do is we essentially take the amount of time measured in degrees of right ascension, which is a little bit of a technicality, but we take that amount of time and extrapolate that amount of time symbolically to a person's life. So we know that, say, if it takes XYZ amount of time for, say, Mars to culminate in a person's nativity, we know around that time symbolically, and there's a formula for rendering. It's about 4 minutes of clock time per degree of right ascension. But there's a way of rendering that symbolically so that we know when a person gets that particular point in their life, extrapolated from that amount of time between birth and culmination, we would expect something really Marsy to show up in their life. And so primary directions, in a way, connect us back to the observed sky. And I think that's so important for any astrologer, no matter what form of astrology or tradition of astrology one is practicing, to have that living connection, that living interaction with the observed sky. And so what we're going to be looking at in the actual lecture itself at NORWAC this year are going to be something called mundane directions. And this is something that's really easy to calculate if you've got a table of rise and set times for the date in question, where you simply look at when does, say, the sun set relative to a person's birth time, and you look at that difference and say, okay, so what is the setting of the sun symbolic of? And perhaps the end of one phase of life, or perhaps because the sun sets in the 7th house, perhaps there's like a really significant shift in somebody's relational identity at that point too. So we're looking at both in terms of interior shifts and in terms of a person's self-concept. And we're also looking at obvious external events happening in a person's life too, when we're looking at these particular mundane directions. And I'll explain what all those technical terms mean in the lecture, but yeah. So
I'm getting that, of course, there are obviously different types of directions. We can have ascended directed, we can have solar arc directed, which is progressing the rest of the planets at the rate of the ascendant, or solar arc progressing the chart at the rate of the sun. You have the secondary progressions, which is a day equals a year. You have tertiary directions, which I would be taking a stab in the dark. So let's just not have me embarrass myself by taking a stab at that one. So in terms of what I'm hearing you say is that because primary directions are related directly to the sky movement, that therefore fill in the blank for me. That therefore it's different from the others because of that. Is it more?
It connects us back to our roots as astrologers of actually observing the sky, of actually watching the sky unfold in real time, and taking that real time difference between the time of birth and the time when whatever culminates or rises or what have you, and applying that to life. To put it in much more of a simple way, I think it brings us back into our roots a little bit as sky watchers.
Okay.
And it's a technique that's been around at least since Ptolemy.
Yeah.
It's detailed in the 4th book of the Tetrabiblos. And so anyone who has an interest in traditional or classical astrology would do well to at least know a little bit of what the theory of primary directions is, even if they're not making that part of their everyday practice with their client work.
Excellent. Well, I think we now know a bit more. Obviously, I do a bit more about primary directions, and I'm hoping those who watch will know a bit more and become at least curious enough to take a shot at listening to and joining your lecture. And of course, after the conference, those who purchase and attend the full conference, they're going to have at least 2 weeks to peruse and look at any number of videos and as many as they can in a 2-week period. So I think this was a great addition to our schedule, giving a nice balance. We like to have a nice balance at NORWAC, from traditional to modern, modern evolutionary to spiritual to a mix in between. So thank you very much, Nate, for taking the time to explain and tell us a bit more about your lecture. Thank you.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely.